In Manitoba, the Legal Professions Act says that the Law Society of Manitoba has the right to impose continuing professional development. I'd have to look at it. I'm not sure it goes so far as to say what particular kinds of continuing professional development you have, but in any case, the Supreme Court of Canada said if you don't do your continuing professional development under that rule, it's a perfectly reasonable exercise of the Law Society's authority to suspend you. So the Law Society in 2020 passed a rule giving itself that right as well, which I take some issue with, because if you look at the Legal Professions Act in Alberta and you compare it to the one in Manitoba, the Alberta Act is much more limited in terms of the power it gives to the Law Society. And so, that rule in and of itself, which is Rule 67.4 of the rules of the Law Society, it's somewhat suspect in my view. But in addition to that, the Law Society then in 2021 imposed as their first piece of continuing professional development that you must take or become suspended, taking this PATH course. I kind of framed out the sort of, the categories that it works through. It's kind of a grab bag of different sort of concepts and histories. The history, contains a lot of things which I've heard of and things which I haven't heard of. And I like to learn about that stuff. So that's interesting. There were some problems with the history, though, as far as I could tell. One is some of the history was not accurate, which sloppy academic history is, there's no place for sloppy academic history in a mandatory course. It better be absolutely solid academia, I would think. But, so for example, they'd stated that Sir John A. Macdonald had introduced the Indian Act, and he hadn't introduced the Indian Act. He was in opposition at the time that it was introduced by the Liberals. In the same paragraph, they said that the Indian Act contained a number of provisions, but it didn't contain many of those provisions until years after it was first passed. So there's that kind of thing, just getting things wrong. And I'm not suggesting that, everything in there was wrong, far from it. But that was one part of the problem. The other part of the problem with the history that I found was it was biased, clearly. It came at problems from one perspective, a pretty provocative perspective, and didn't spend any time, talking about, for example, there was this terrible policy. What were the purported reasons behind the policy? At least, or what sort of challenges was the government facing that it was trying to solve, that sort of thing.